once you jump into the live sound rabbit hole, there's no bottom. You have to find a place where you're comfortable and stop there. But believe me, if you don't, you can quickly be into the millions, and that's not an exaggeration.
Wow.
Now, sorry, viewers, I don't mean to scare you, because you can stop well short of that. You just have to have the willpower to do it, I think. So.
Which, yeah, DJs always shown we have a great sense of will or ability to resist.
Well, you kind of, like I said, you have to kind of pick where you want to be.
Yeah.
If you say, well, I want to go mix tours tomorrow, if you're also supplying the gear, then that's going to be a really big number. But we've jumped a long way from a 3 or 4 piece. This board has 8 mic preamps, so the 8 XLR jacks on it. And so here's a consideration. If you say, well, I want to mix a rock band, that probably is undersized. Drums alone could eat up more than 8 of those channels. You can get into that very quickly, even if we just do snare top and kick out. And I like to do a snare top and bottom and a kick in and a kick out. Now, obviously, again, I'm sort of contradicting myself, but I think it's a good illustration of how the rabbit hole can get deep quick. So, if we've got, kick, snare, hat, maybe we've got, 2 rack toms, a floor tom, and a couple of overheads, boom, you're out of channels.
Right.
Another cool thing, and I'm sure some of our viewers are already thinking, boy, I just decided I don't want to do live sound. No, it could be, it's a lot of fun, and it can be a great way to make some money, as John said, and it doesn't have to be immensely complicated. And John's going to do a really good job of reining me back in, I think. So, remember the mixing board I go to work with has 96 channels. So I don't bump into the top too much,
So when you're using the bigger board, how many channels when you're kind of doing the max number of channels that you would use, what is that? Are you talking 80?
I think the most I've ever actually mixed is 62.
Okay.
Now, something else in the way that my board works is my effects returns, it treats it like an outboard physical effect. So, for example, even though the effects live inside the board, I route them out on an aux, and then I route them back in through an input channel. So I might have had another 6 channels of effects, so 68.
Okay.
And mind you, that's a handful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the best mix engineer in the world. Believe me, I've met many, many, many mix engineers that are far better than me. I can hold my own at a working level. 62 is plenty for me. That's a handful.
Sure. Now you mentioned also that was an analog board. Now, comparing an analog board to a digital board, what's the pros and cons of going left or right when it comes to the board type?
Well, this one I would even go so far as to say is a bit of a hybrid, because it does have that digital I/O. There are some really great digital boards like Soundcraft, and they have their AR series now, which is a very inexpensive console. And then they have their AI series, and then they have their Studio Live 3, which is really a full digital board. Some of the key differences, for example, on this board, left to right is 1 through 12, always 1 through 12. On my board, I can change any fader to be anything at any time. So I can have an input channel, I can have a matrix, I can have an aux, I can have a channel multi. I mean, it really can decide what information is landing, and the faders just become handles for whatever we assign them to. And again, I don't think I'd necessarily start there.
Yeah.
But even with simple digital boards, and I love the Persona Studio Live for this. They're so easy to use. They follow kind of an analog format. They're not as intimidating for people to get into, and yet they're feature rich. You have full onboard effects. You have all kinds of routing opportunities. You have more auxes. It just presents a much greater suite of tools for you to use. One of the really key things is dynamics. So on this board, we mentioned a couple of these channels had some limiter buttons, and it's either in or it's out, more or less. On a digital board, that limiter and or compressor can be shaped. Mixing is an art, so we can use those things as tools to enhance the sound. Another thing would be parametric EQ. Having parametric EQ on each channel, that's a big deal. This board has a 3-band EQ with a sweepable mid. We can choose the frequency of the mid, but that's about it. A parametric EQ is going to be very nice. Go back and watch our shows on EQs. I know we've done a couple,
Yep.
where we can choose what those EQ filter frequencies are at, what the width of that filter is, and what the gain or attenuation is. That said, it's a brand new day in the sound world. Well, as of a few years ago. There are small mixers like this that's basically just a box, and they get bigger. And in fact, Personas just today, released a new line of stage boxes that also act as standalone mixers. Another Soundcraft here, and Behringer has their X Series, XR, whatever, where using an iPad or a computer, we can control this and all of the functionality that lives inside. And this thing's a couple $100. I mean, a couple $100, it's less than a microphone.
Yeah.
Speaking of microphones,
which if you're going to be doing audio for whether it's a ceremony or for a small live band, is an important part of the whole system.
Very, very important. This is, if you get nothing else out of this show and you want to do live sound, take this part. Any problem you create for yourself with bad equipment, bad microphone, wrong microphone, poor quality cable, whatever, you really can't fix later. You're going to struggle with that greatly. It's going to make your life much harder. Now, here again, the rabbit hole is really deep. You don't have to go out and buy a whole set of KSM microphones or something, but get good, solid quality stuff that's price appropriate for what you're trying to do, because believe me, they're not created equal, and you're going to pay for that later. Somewhere in the mix, you're going to suffer for a cheap cable or a cheap DI or a cheap microphone or the wrong microphone. Microphones are designed, and we had a show on microphones where we talked about that. They're designed for different things. Why you see a kick drum microphone looks very different than a condenser we might use for overheads and that sort of thing. And so, you can struggle with mic placement, and you can struggle with all kinds of different things to try to make up for that. But boy, it's just sure a lot better if you start with the right microphone for the job. That's going to make your life so much easier. Now, within that, there's a lot of, a friend of mine just asked me today, maybe it was yesterday, but he said, "Oh, which condenser do you like to use for drum overheads?" And I said, "Oh, well, 4 different ones come to mind,
Sure.
depending on what I'm doing, KSM 137 or an E914 or an SM81, or, it just kind of depends. Starting out, just pick a good one. You don't need to have 4 different overhead choices. As you build some gigs and you get some bands that are willing to pay you, maybe you can get into that. But, if they're not paying you much, then they can't expect much, right? So,
yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand. You don't want to be paying for something for 10 years in that situation if you're only making a little bit of money off it and you're trying to buy. And we've seen DJs do that way too often.
Oh, it still happens to me. I mean, I've bought a mic for a gig, but I think 24 years into my career, some of that, is somewhat of an indulgence, and you sort of, again, you sort of allow yourself to do that. You say, I really kind of always wanted that mic anyway, or
sure,
whatever, but as a business decision, it's probably not the best one. Maybe for a specific gig, if you needed something, you could rent it or borrow it from another sound guy friend and return the favor sometime down the road, that sort of thing. While I was talking about microphones, I mentioned direct boxes.
Yep.
Here's another one. Your best friend, a good quality DI. That's what we call these direct boxes, DI, direct insert. Basically, this is going to allow you to take your guitar signal or, or a keyboard or whatever, and it's going to send it out as a balanced XLR that you can send to your board. It's got a ground lift switch here. If you got a buzz, you can get rid of that real quick and easy. It's got a pad, which is going to drop that signal down. Maybe their incoming signal is too loud and it's going to overdrive the preamps on your board. You fixed it all right here. Happy day. Good DI. Stereo DI, if you got a keyboard, there's a stereo DI, 2 XLRs. Done. And it's going to sound good, and it's going to make you sound good, and it's going to make you look good.
You mentioned keyboards and guitars. Is there any other instrument that would utilize a DI box also?
Guitars.
Guitars.
pretty much anything with a quarter. I just had a guitar actually not that long ago. I just had a guitar on stage. I'm not even kidding. Pretty much any other quarter inch, instrument level type thing. Now there are special DIs too for tracks coming out of computers and that sort of thing. Pro AV2 from Radial or the JPC. I didn't bring examples of that, but those are some that I use depending if you want active output or passive output. If you have an active DI, you're either going to have to stick a battery in it or use phantom power. On this particular board, phantom power is global. When you push the phantom power button, you get it on every channel, which is usually not an issue. Other more expensive boards may allow you to choose individually which channels have phantom power. And of course, can't stress this enough. I know it sounds like a self-serving plug, but good cables. Seriously, you'll drive yourself crazy with cheap cables chasing down problems. Just can't tell you.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Especially for people who've never experienced a bad cable and trying to track down, why is there's something weird going on? Oh yes, it's that cable way back here.
Yeah. Spend hours trying to figure out why there's a buzz in something, oh, it's just this cable.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had it happen even on our live shows. One night when we were getting ready to record, and it's like, why am I? It's not working. Oh,
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Weren't we talking about cables that night? In fact,
exactly, it was the night that we were going to do that, and it crept out on the microphone, so we had to get a different one.
For the record, it was not one of the NLFX cables.
It was not, because those are actually in my road show. I think I might have one here now on this system when I moved over here, if I'm not mistaken.
Just had to put that out there for the record.
But yeah, that particular night it was not that, because I kept them all, and I think after that I had Kat send up I had some 6-foot cables sent up, so I have them.
I'll tell you a couple things that I think are an absolute must on a soundboard. In addition to the things that we mentioned, one is a low cut for vocals, the ability to cut anything below a certain frequency. Again, on this board, you push in a button, and I'm just reading it. This one's 100 hertz. It's 100 hertz always and forever. That's it. I like a selectable roll off, where I can choose where that low cut takes effect. But the more features you want, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if you get a lot of features in a cheap board, then you probably got, cheap components in the board. You're going to suffer with the DA conversion. There's really no free lunch. Is kind of my point.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to find balance. In this day and age, there are some really well-featured, inexpensive, I'd even go so far as to say cheap digital boards that are only a couple grand. I don't want to be the bearer of the bad news, but if that sounds like a lot of money, live sound's probably not for you.
Yeah.
In reality, that's very, very, very cheap. In terms of what a quality board will cost, but those boards are out all over the place, and they'll do the job for these simple low cost gigs. You can get into a quality board for a decent board for a couple grand or less. I don't even know what these the new Studio Live from Personas costs. A little Studio Live 3. Starting at like 1,500 for the 16, give or take. I'm not sure exactly what the number is.
I'm not sure either. It's been a little while since we've looked at those, but definitely nice boards.
Very robustly featured boards. Very robustly featured boards.
Because we installed a Personas board, a little bit larger one at the church and such, and oh my goodness gracious, that was fun.
Yeah, the preamps are actually pretty decent on it. Again, it would be, you can't really compare that to a Digico or something like that. But that's a different world. You don't need that for the types of gigs that we're talking about doing. So get into a 16 or a 24 or even a 32 channel console, and you're going to be well set for just about any gig you're likely going to do. Take a typical rock show, channel list, and let's say we got 8 for drums, 2 guitar, bass, 3 vocals. You got plenty of room yet, So throw some keys and a keytar in there just because you can,
Yeah, because everyone loves a keytar.
Everybody loves a keytar.
Just following the chat here a little bit. Todd was asking about that cable tester that you were using. I believe he's referring to the one that you used when you did the road test with the parade going over and the color on the one side. Was that something you made, or is that a purchasable tester?
Well, you could buy that one.
Everything's for sale. Anything's for sale.
If he's referring to the one we used for the parade, that there aren't really any off-the-shelf cable testers designed to test a parade running over a cable.
I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Yeah,
but
isn't that something we all want to do?
So I made that one. I actually came down about 8:00 the night before to the shop. I just sort of had a last-minute inspiration and kind of whipped that out real quick. So I was actually sitting at home musing, thinking, and my wife said, do it. You should do it. You should totally do it. I'm like, okay, that's what I need to know. So I'll just drive across town and go make a, widget.
So there's your answer. It was a custom made piece that's been made.
And now we do have cable testers that are readily for sale. They're $40. They test a variety of most common pro audio connections. So those are in stock and ready to ship.
Let's talk a couple of minutes about the speakers. Now we've talked a little bit about the processing, microphones, DI boxes. What are we looking at for a sound system when it comes to trying to do live applications? Can we use our typical DJ systems, or should we look at something else?
Oh, sure you can. Here again, you got to have enough rig for the gig. And in live music, we have stage volume to be considered. Drums make acoustic sound. Guitar amps and things are going to add to your stage noise. So you're going to find that you need more firepower than maybe you thought. But anybody who went to ARM DJs saw that, we did the jam session, and I did it with a pair of ETX 12 tops and 4 ETX 18 subs, which is certainly within the realm of possibility for a DJ as a rig. And it was louder than loud. I didn't really feel like I was struggling to keep the vocals and things out over in front of, everything else. It was louder than I wanted because the drummer was louder than I wanted.
Sure.
At least one of them was.
Right.
And that sort of dictates everything because you can't control, you're starting at that point and saying, well, I guess that's what we're mixing around. But yeah, and if you said, well, I want to do a rock band and I want to do it with just a pair of 12s and no subs, I'd say, boy, you're going to struggle, because you got nothing for your kick drum and all that low end energy. I'd like to put my floor tom in there, definitely bass guitar, keys, that sort of thing. Anything that's going to need that low frequency reproduction. And those 12s are really going to struggle without the help of subs. So yeah, I'd say subs are a must. Now, you mentioned your 3 or 4 piece. Depending on the style of music, you maybe don't need it. So,
I would assume if you're a couple of guitar players who are a couple that are doing acoustic guitar and not really getting into a bass guitar, that would definitely change your needs on your subwoofer side for sure.
Yeah, you likely wouldn't need a sub at all then. And it depends on the total volume you're trying to accomplish as well. I mean, what are you trying to get away with, and actually I shouldn't say get away with, we don't want to get away with things. We want to do it right.
What you're wanting to do with it.
Yeah. Are you doing a concert for 1,000 people outside? You're going to need some firepower.
Okay. I'm just checking some stats or some of the chat and such. You mentioned earlier about there's the DI boxes, that there's different things that a person can do with those and such. And then you were mentioning one that was specific to using a laptop. And I actually had a situation where I was doing an event, a youth rally event, as the performer, and they gave me basically this wire that went from the stage all the way back to the back of the auditorium where they had the main board. But it was there was no DI box. It was basically like an XLR cable that they had an 1/8-inch jack converter on. And I was thinking to myself, a long run like that would be an unbalanced signal, I'm guessing, coming out of my laptop. Isn't there a better way to run that signal so you're not going to pick up interference and such?
Well, absolutely. We want balanced. We want it to be on an XLR. Now, you mentioned that had an XLR converter, and there are some small boxes, LTI blocks and that sort of thing. Switchcraft's got a nice one. We have those in stock, shameless plug. But, where you can take that 1/8-inch from a computer at 3.5 millimeter, and then inside there is a transformer, and it does balance that signal. And now you can go a long distance without loss of signal or noise. And there are also specific DIs. Again, I mentioned a few, from this company's Radial. They're probably probably the number one name in touring direct boxes. They even have a Bluetooth DI where you could actually Bluetooth to the DI. And now for highest quality sound, I wouldn't recommend doing that, but they have another one that you can USB into the DI. And then of course there are ones where you can actually connect right in with, this one is only 1/4 inch, but my active DI has an 1/8 inch input. And so I can connect into the DI with an 1/8 inch input, excuse me.
Yeah, get that out there.
And then send out 2 XLRs for balanced left and right. So, yeah. And another thing, now we live in a great world today with, digital boards, a little like this box board. You could maybe leave that on your stage and you could mix from an iPad or something in front of house. Or we can get a digital board and then you can have a digital snake and run a single Cat5 between the stage. But there is that issue you pointed out of how do I get my signal from the stage to my board? And the other way we can do that is with an analog snake, which is basically, and I didn't bring one home to show because my snakes are all big and really heavy.
Right.
And I thought about it for a second and then thought, no. But it allows you to, it's one big fat cable that has lots of little cables in it, basically. And you have a fan end that plugs into your board and a box end that goes on your stage, and simplifies that process of running however many cables from the stage to your board. And there again, your snake is going to have XLR connections on it most likely. And so you would use that DI on stage or wherever the laptop is. Maybe that laptop is on stage. It's playing, loops or stems or something. Yeah. They got a, Pro Tools rig up there or something. I mean, music at every level now has some electronic presence in it, tracks, I guess. And put that into that DI and out you go.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was assuming when they were saying, "Oh yeah, we'll have a drop for you up on the stage." I was expecting to see the DI box and such, and it's like, this is interesting. He doesn't have that.
Yeah, I take very little for granted anymore. I carry more and more of my own gear, even when I'm speaking now. We shouldn't assume that others know what we know. So.
Why do bands still use a small amp rack on stage with a mic hanging on it?
Like a guitar amp?
I'm wondering if that's what they're referring to, because I've seen that a few times where there's a guitar amps being used and they have a mic hanging on that too.
Yeah, and a mic hanging over the front like a 609 or something, something like that. I don't know. Have they answered the question? If that's what?
No. This is just brand new, and that's a good question because I've seen that, and I've always thought about why don't they just run it direct, into a DI box into the board?
Let's assume that that's the question because we can certainly answer that, and the answer is tone. Guitar players can be really particular about this, and I'm wondering how many of my customers might ever see this video. So, but listen, you're not going to win an argument with a guitar player about tone. And that's why they choose different amps, and that's why they choose different guitars. And sometimes it's necessary even for them to turn those amps up to some level to achieve that tone. And so here's a little dirty secret of the touring world. Many times when you go to concerts, the amp stacks you see on stage aren't real. There's nothing in them. But that doesn't mean that they're not playing through a guitar amp. They very, very well might be. It just might be backstage or beside the stage or under the stage. But it's not creating a huge stage noise problem for us. But it is somewhere, and it is mic'd. And the reason why you wouldn't just go from your guitar into a direct box and into the board is, again, you want the sound of that amp. You want the tone of that guitar. And so we're miking it, and that's a more accurate reproduction. And in fact, on bass guitar, a lot of times we'll do both. We'll take a DI and a mic. We'll mic the bass cabinet and take a DI, and then work with both of those inputs to get the contour of the sound that we want.
Would there be, and because of capturing a direct DI and then you're capturing with the microphone, is there any kind of a latency issue or is it just because they're just not noticeable because they're that close in time as they hit the board?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my favorite word when referring to time is phase. And that's a
Phase,
biggie.
yeah.
I mean, that is really, when people think about phase, it sounds like a fancy word, but phase is really just a word for time. And the short answer is no, not really, usually. And if there ever was to be some such issue, most of the boards that we work with have the ability to put a delay on some channel. So if some channel was arriving later than another, we could just delay it back to the one that we wanted to mesh it with. But that's a really deep rabbit hole in and of its own. I don't think we want to get too deep into phase today,
Yeah.
but I will say that you see people struggle for ages, eons, decades, hours, I don't know, trying to fix some problem electronically when just moving the microphone would fix the problem. you know, think about it in terms of time, and sound travels very slow, and people don't like to learn about the physics and all the numbers, but it really all starts to make sense when you break it down. 1128 feet per second sounds pretty slow, therefore feet matter. We think about the relationship and the time relationship of microphone placement and phase. Many of the bigger boards have phase invert buttons, which is really just 180-degree phase. We're not adjusting phase in terms of some gradiated value. It's just a 180 or not with that button. But we can, for example, play drums and try toggling phase in and out. And you say, wow, that sounds better. Well, leave it that way then. If it sounds better, that's probably right.
Mm-hmm.
But the short answer, typically that's not an issue with something like a bass rig. So.
Good. Just checking to see if we have any more questions that have rolling through.
You can learn all these things as you go, too, by the way. I mean, obviously, it's great if you knew them all before you started, but if I waited to know them all before I started, I still wouldn't be started. So,
and there's parts that a person can, if you have that situation coming up. I mean, it's not like you have to, because as you said, you can use your DJ speakers for most things to get started in that arena, and you could use different components and add and upgrade as you go along if it becomes something that you really are passionate about doing.
Absolutely. Just don't oversell, I think. There's an old saying in our industry, fake it until you make it, which is fine to a degree. Don't promise people things you're not quite ready to deliver.
Yeah. This is definitely one of those times you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, because you won't be doing sound very long if you do that.
Probably not. I think people be a lot more willing. Look, if they're offering a small amount of money, maybe they're willing to kind of work with you, and you say, hey, let's grow together. I'll do sound for your band. You pay me this much, and I'll kind of learn and get gear as we go, and we'll get better together. Maybe they can get along with that. Maybe they can't. I mean, we all know there's a broad variety of customers out there, and there are people who will approach a guy like me and say, yeah, if you would bring in your rig and your crew and I'll give you $100, dude. You can't even get me to walk outside to the semi for $100.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry, but we're not working together because we're not on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have that level of expectation, but that's just not grounded in reality. There's just nobody in the world is going to do that, and whereas, maybe if you're starting out with a little analog board and trying to cut your teeth in sound, you might say, you know what, I could do it for $100 tonight.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get a touring rig and a touring engineer and a crew. It's just not reality.
Yeah.
So.
Good stuff, Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for being with us tonight. If you have any questions or anything, or if you're looking to get into that live sound application, Ben is a resource for that. You can ask him questions of what to purchase and what's going to be the best thing to get you going. I mean, that's part of the Ben's NLFX Pro good customer relations.
Well, I love to help, and it's fun to see people begin their journey with sound, and it's fun to see them as they progress on the journey. And I hope what I just said about the $100 thing didn't come across arrogant or wrong.
No,
because I think at some point it's okay to say, no, I have XYZ invested in my gear, and I have years invested in my time. Sometimes it's okay to say no too. Say, no, not your guy. That's okay. It makes room for the new guys. Believe me, I was a new guy once.
Oh, for sure. We all started there as DJs. as whatever, any aspect of our business. Everyone's the new guy at one point in time.
And so I guess that's part of it too, is just recognizing as you go down that journey and you get a lot of money sunk into your gear. And now I'm going to contradict myself again. That's just sort of the recurring theme for the show. I have a good friend who lives down where I grew up, actually, back very close to my old hood. He's a very close friend. He's probably watching the show. And I have no doubt he could mix on any rock tour he wanted. I believe that. Mm-hmm. Yet he goes out and does shows for a few $100. I don't know what, 500, something like that. He's booked 5-6 nights a week. He's very busy and he's very happy. And he's had bands that have said, "Hey, come on our tour." And he said, "No, just don't want to."
Sure.
That's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. Frankly, it frustrates me because I'm like, dude, you could do big things, but you know what? If you're not happy doing that, then don't. You know, he's happy doing what he does, and I think that's fantastic. God bless him. He's following his heart, and I maybe in some ways I'm a little bit jealous.
I know what you mean by that one. So, all right, gang, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back in about 20 minutes with Brian Red. We're going to be talking about getting Brian and I doing a wedding and some of the aspects of the wedding tonight. So we'll get into that. And then next week, actually, we're going to be off with some of the shows because it's Wedding MBA next week, and we're going to be down in Las Vegas. Woo! So, Ben, we'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. See you after the break.
Sounds great. Thank you guys for being with us, and we'll be back in about 20. Bye-bye. No, that didn't go, so we're still on live because this didn't go.